Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, presented by Salonis, Season 8, Episode 22. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our special guest in this episode recorded live in the Bambuser podcasting studio backstage Shoptalk Europe in Barcelona is Lars-Johan Jarnheimer. He is the chairman of INGKA Holding B.V, which is the holding company that controls the majority of IKEA stores worldwide. He's been in that role since 2015. We caught up with him right after his main stage keynote fireside with the amazing Sarah Engel, president of January Digital, and so we took the opportunity to chat with Sarah as well about the interview and her perspectives on retail and digital.
Yeah, mix up the format a little bit, but I think it was a good call on our part. We have two fun interviews for everybody to enjoy.
Now, you are sounding a bit different. I'm back here in Toronto. You are not at home. You decided to escape that Texas heat with a stop in Bangkok on the way to Singapore, right?
Because I needed more humidity. So similar heat, more humidity. So exactly, yes, I am in my hotel room. It is Sunday night local time. I have just gotten back from wandering around the night market here, cruising around in a tuk-tuk. So yeah, that's been pretty fun. Just a couple of days here, seen some interesting things. I was going to mention two things really quickly because we have a lot to get to. One is right adjacent to the hotel where I'm staying, which is the Park Hyatt, is one of 4 or 5 of the nicer malls in Bangkok called the Central Embassy Mall, and quite high-end, beautiful design. The thing that really struck me about it is how good the food offering is. And in my international travels, including to Europe, but also the Middle East and Asia, I am always struck by how much better the food offering is in these malls than it is in the North American malls. So if anybody's listening from Simon or Brookfield, get your butts over here and just copy the food offering for some of your malls. It makes it way more interesting. But anyway, I've opined on that several times. But speaking of dining, how's that for a segue?
Nice segue.
Last night, I went to Gaghan for dinner, which we could spend a lot of time talking about that. Perhaps we should have Gaghan on the podcast, along with Aaron Franklin from Franklin Barbecue for a remarkable food podcast. But anyway, restaurant was just named the #1 restaurant in Asia, number 9 in the world. And it was quite an experience, I will say. But it's a great, like I said, I can't go into all the details, but just 15 diners, 22 courses, crazy music, lights, like it's really over the top. But it's a great example. I mean, you want to talk about remarkable? I can assure you, everybody who went there that night is talking about it with their friends, sharing on social media, all that kind of stuff. So if you find yourself in Bangkok, check out Gaghan. But I also think some retailers might want to go over there and learn some lessons about how to take things up to 11.
Now, speaking of lessons, let's talk about Shoptalk Europe. We were just there in Barcelona. What did you take away from some hot takes? What are your hot takes on the show?
Well, it was a good show. I think very well executed by the Shoptalk team. Congratulations. And of course, fun to catch up with people and learn a bit more about the European market in particular. You know, a lot of the topics have been pretty much the same one I think we've seen at other shows in the last year or so. Certainly AI, top of mind. What I found from my conversations, not necessarily so much what was said on stage, is maybe AI is reaching, if people know the Gartner hype cycle, the peak of inflated expectations. Certainly some companies talking about getting very tangible results. Others saying, maybe not quite so much. So I think this idea that perhaps Jason Goldberg originally said that AI is overhyped in the short term, but perhaps underhyped in the long term. That seemed to be kind of the prevailing wisdom. I don't know if you got any different sense from what you heard or observed.
Qualitatively different than something like Metaverse, which had a fast rise and an equally fast burnout. I think it's just, as you said, the hype cycles, everything's AI. You got to say AI in a presentation or you don't feel like it's relevant. So I think that's reached peak for sure. But I think that the technology itself and the things it's going to do in the retail industry and others are going to be pretty powerful. So I don't think it's the nonsense of the metaverse. I think it's real, but we can stop talking about it. Like, we know it's important. So there you go.
It is a lot. It is a lot for sure. One of the other trends was not that I haven't heard this before, but I felt like more people were starting to talk about Gen Alpha. Obviously, we've been talking ad nauseum about millennials and Gen Z, but Gen Alpha starting to get closer to the significant spending age range. So perhaps we'll be hearing about Gen Alpha ad nauseum in the not too distant future. Just like AI seems to be very top of mind in most of the events, Retail Media Networks continues to remain buzzy. Didn't necessarily get the sense that it was at the peak of inflated expectations. I think it's more or less on a kind of a steady growth cycle with a relatively clear view of at least how the online part works, maybe not quite as clear how significant the brick and mortar opportunity was going to be. One thing I was just going to mention on this topic, which was not something that was shared at Shoptalk, but eMarketer, who's been following this among other things for quite some time, came up with an updated prediction for Retail Media Networks, and they continue to predict strong growth over the next 3 years, something like a 30%-ish CAGR. But what I thought was interesting is they predict it still won't reach, even by 2028, 1% of total media spending. So to me, that just kind of, small base, growing quickly, dominated by Amazon, Walmart, and a few others, but still really small in the scheme of things. The last thing I was going to mention, and I almost sent you, but I ran out of time, and you probably don't have the time to look at it. I almost sent you a couple
always
of
time
presentations.
For you, Steve. I always stop whatever I'm doing, and you send me.
Of course. Well,
everything
you have very good judgment, incredible powers of discernment. But we were talking about how it seems like all of a sudden, or at least in the last few months at these conferences and in the broader retail media, I guess, we hear this term unified commerce, people talking about it like it's a new thing. And I continue to scratch my head for a couple of reasons. Not only did I lead a unified commerce initiative at Neiman Marcus in, I believe it was 2005, might be 2006. So certainly we were not at the leading edge of this. We were not the only ones to use that terminology. I know for sure JCPenney was talking about it, but others as well. And then I found a couple of keynotes that I did, one for Nike and one for Dick's Sporting Goods. I believe the Nike one was almost 10 years ago, and the Dick's Sporting Goods one was maybe 9 years ago. And in both cases, I had unified in my presentation. So I'm trying to figure out whether this is just like the biannual cycling of terms. So we go from seamless to frictionless to omni-channel to multi-channel or whatever. But
and back again.
All of a sudden, unified commerce. What a new idea. I'm like, okay. So
I think it's like bell bottoms. It's like fashion. It's like bell bottoms. We're all going to be wearing skinny ties and bell bottoms. So unified commerce is going to lead the way.
New York's hottest club is unified commerce. It's got everything.
Now, I understand you have a Leaders Leap offer for the people.
Yeah, it was. If anybody's sleeping on getting their copy of Leaders Leap, I have a special offer. Now, this, unfortunately, for reasons that I don't completely understand, is only available in the United States and the UK. But if you buy the hardcover copy of Leaders Leap in the US or in the UK and send us the receipt, we will send you a free version of the audiobook. So that'll be, nice. We'll just send you a code and you'll be able to download a free Audible version of Leaders Leap. So just send that receipt to leadersleap@sageberryconsulting.com. We'll put the details in the show notes. But if you've been waiting, here's a great chance to have the hardcover as well as the Audible version for one low price.
All right, well, let's jump into the news of the week. And the news of the week started here in Canada, actually, of all places, with we were the first in the G7 to cut our interest rates, but I don't think we'll be the last, and I don't think we were the only ones.
Well, we've been waiting, of course, for quite some time, and it seems like the dates keep moving out. But yes, Canada made the move last week, quickly followed by the European Central Bank. First interest rate cuts since 2019. Now, the U.S., though, is looking, continuing to look, I guess we could say at this point, since this has been kind of the same story for close to a year now, that interest rates will be on hold for a bit more because we saw last week a very strong jobs report, stronger than expected. So that is great for people who are trying to get hired. But of course, as we often see, good news is often bad news when it comes to the stock market and interest rates. So we'll see what the direction looks like. But yes, we're finally starting to see some countries cut their interest rates. So I know a lot of people are hoping for more in the not too distant future.
Well, and the impact in the U.S. has been from an interest rate, of course, on mortgages, and it's kind of frozen everyone in place because they don't want to renew at a higher rate. In Canada, it's kind of sucked up discretionary income because everyone renews their mortgage and is renewing at a wildly, significantly higher amount of money. So it's really, really impacting discretionary purchases right now. And I think the Bank of Canada, for example, heard that message and saw those declines and said, okay, I think we've tapped the brakes enough. It's time to, turn the throttle, go for a little bit. So we'll see if that continues. I think it's added some buoyancy and some confidence already to the market now that they've kind of turned it around. So anyway, we'll see what happens from here. On an interesting story, TJ Maxx and Marshalls, great retailer, and they are equipping their employees with body cams. I mean, the violence in retail stores, it's one thing to lose the goods, but the violence that we've been seeing across North America, and let's be clear, that violence is a strategy. It's not a random occurrence. It's an organized retail crime strategy. So TJ Maxx and Marshalls have geared up their employees. What do you think of this?
We'll see where this goes. I mean, as we've talked about a bunch of times over the last year or so, the increase in theft and like you say, the risk of violence, not the risk, the occurrence of violence is a big issue. So we're seeing retailers try lots of different strategies. This is the first time I've heard about body cams. I think if it helps, we'll see more retailers do it. I guess it remains to be seen how big a difference it will make. Yeah. I think, clearly some organized criminals are so adept at stealing that they may very well circumvent this, but we'll see. I think it's interesting. I think we're going to continue to see retailers do what they can to try to get the rates down and keep their employees safe.
I talked to some law enforcement professionals here at a loss prevention conference I was speaking at, and they said, listen, it won't probably dissuade, but it will provide evidence, and evidence is what they need to go get these people and get them off the streets and take care of it. So it's maybe suppress it a bit, but it's visual evidence, and then it's undeniable. So anyway, it's very helpful from that perspective.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add to that, which is maybe a little bit of a cynical take or just a realistic take, is one of the things I've learned about loss prevention and security in general over the years is a lot of times, and this would be true if you're trying to protect your home as well, it's not necessarily that the particular technique is super effective. It just causes the criminals to go to a different place. So I'm not saying that TJ Maxx are trying to steer criminals to other places, but I think they're looking out for their interest in their employees. That's job one.
Let's talk about our friends at Forrester. Put out an e-com growth rate that was actually fairly modest. It was certainly consistent, or certainly modest compared to what we're used to seeing.
Well, this gets a little bit confusing without the visuals, but I think most people listening will probably know that if you look pre-COVID at the growth rates in e-commerce, they were tending to run in many markets at the 13 to 15% year over year rate.
Yep.
This new, and then of course during COVID, we saw this significant acceleration, and then we saw the growth rates really moderate. So if you actually look at it over a longer term basis, the average annual growth rate is in the low teens. This new forecast from Forrester predicts that the average growth rate globally going forward will be just under 9%. So that's still quite significant growth for sure. I think most of the predictions have physical retail continuing to grow more in the 1% to 2% range. So this will continue to push up the e-commerce penetration. Again, that's the percent of where it's ordered, not necessarily how it's fulfilled. My standard caveat. But that will get, again, on a global basis, that will get, even with that growth rate, physical stores are estimated to still account for 76% of all transactions. So once again, physical retail, still not dead. The other thing they just mentioned, which of course lines up with some of the other data we've seen from folks like the ICSC is that new store openings, in addition to whatever gets rung up in the store, also have this so-called halo effect. In other words, they influence the shopping experience more broadly. So they tend to boost online shopping in the immediate trade area by about 7%. So just bear in mind, it really, it's almost like you have to look at the unified number, kind of take a unified commerce perspective to really understand what's going on.
Oh, well, speaking of unified, let's talk about earnings. So let's start with Lululemon, who I described.
I'm in favor of them.
I'm in favor
on the record.
All right. Well, that's good and clear. I did a post about Lululemon kind of dealing with the mosquitoes in the tent in terms of competition. Now, their sales their sales surpassed expectations, but
yeah, the expectations were low. So Lululemon's been like a lot of companies that get to be quite big. It's harder for them to put up the big numbers of the past. So yes, on the good news, they did a little bit better than expectations, but their comp store sales were essentially flat, which Wall Street was happy about. But overall, the Lululemon stock has been down nearly 40% in the past year. Now, I will mention that I did buy some Lululemon stock on the dip a while back. But, there is, like you said, there's so much competition now in the, I guess we could call it broader athleisure, casual apparel, sporting goods space. So it'll be interesting to see whether they're able to get momentum going. Generally speaking, one of the broader comments I was going to make as we're coming to the end of earnings seasons, I think we've got a few more retailers coming up here in the next week, but we've got a lot of brands that really, we'll talk about one more in a second, but really didn't put up particularly good numbers. When I reflect back on what we've seen this past quarter, for the most part, it was the Amazons and the Walmarts and the Costcos that put up big numbers.
Yeah.
A few exceptions, like we talked about Marks and Spencer, I think last week or the week before, but a lot of the other folks are flat or down, which of course, one of my predictions was that flat is the new up. In other words, you'd be pretty happy in many cases just to get to even year on year. But anyway, the last one I was going to mention is Victoria's Secret, which has been trying to do a turnaround for several years here. And there's not a lot of evidence that they're gaining any meaningful traction. Their comps were down negative 8%. And that's comparing against last year where they were down 14%. So that's a pretty significant sales decline. Now, I'm sure you could say they're getting caught up in some of the discretionary recession impact, but still, some of the things that they're trying to do to get the business back on track don't seem to be working. They are continuing to prune their store count. They're downsizing some of their stores. I know a couple of stores in the Dallas area they've relocated to significantly smaller, and their online businesses has been growing, but that was also pretty anemic. So I don't know. They need something new, new at Victoria's Secret.
Do you think that the day is past? I mean, they were such part of culture at one point, with everything from the runway shows to the, their models were the top models. Everybody talked about them. Now nobody's talking about Victoria's Secret. Are you a believer that they can come back and recreate that magic, or will it be a slow kind of decline to, I won't say irrelevance, but just,
I think it's tough because they were, as you mentioned, they were clearly known for being part of the kind of cultural zeitgeist and, very sexy. And then that became a thing that wasn't too politically correct, or however you want to describe it. And they tried to move towards being more inclusive. But then the question is, well, what's really their point of differentiation now?
Right.
I'm not suggesting it should go back to the ultra sexy, but I'm just saying, what is their point of differentiation? And in the meantime, plenty of other companies, whether we're talking about some of the disruptor brands or Aerie from American Eagle, there's lots of other intimate apparel kind of brands now. So I think it's a very, very crowded field, and they have this massive footprint. So to try to be as big and as profitable a business as they were a few years ago without coming up with something really new, I think is difficult. So I think they've lost some of the customers that like the sexy factor, and they've not been able to replace them, obviously, just based upon the sales results we've seen the last couple of years.
So here's a brand, just open up a flagship. I'd never heard of them until you and I were talking about footwear, of all things. And
apparently it's my job to introduce you to running shoes.
Brands. I have 6 pairs of or something like that of On. I love those shoes. I love their store in Williamsburg. And I happened to notice when I was in New York for NRF that Hoka was going to be opening a flagship on I think on Fifth Avenue, and it looks like they've done it, and they've got some ambition. So talk about that and the context of, I don't know, what do we call them? Sneaker wars?
Well, the business has been heating up. It's one of the things that I think has hurt Nike, though Nike obviously sells more than sneakers, but have a big footwear business. But yeah, between the growth of On Running, Asics, Brooks, but Hoka is one of the hot brands. I've actually been wearing Hoka for probably 5 or 6 years now. They're the shoe that I run in, so I like them, an early adopter. But it's a little bit of this ugly shoe phenomenon that people often talk about, because I didn't think Hoka were ugly. I just think they're comfortable. But anyway, apparently people think they're ugly, and along with Birkenstock and others, they're part of this trend, I guess. But yeah, I think it is interesting to see the overall increase in competition. But I think in particular, the investment in their own stores. So this is the 8th store for Hoka, but their first flagship. And obviously that's not huge in the scheme of things, but it comes on the heels, no pun intended, of On Running making a big move into more of their own stores. So On plans to open close to 100 stores over the next several years. So I think it's an interesting space. Some rumors about some of the other shoe brands getting into it a bit more as well. So, and then there's some brands coming out of Europe. So yeah, it's a very, very hot space, and I expect we will continue to see some significant investment in physical retail from these brands.
All right. Well, lots going on, lots of travel happening, and lots of news. So let's, just before we get to our fantastic back-to-back interviews with Lars-Johan from IKEA and Sarah Engel from January Digital, let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Celonis. Want to ramp up speed and productivity for your entire retail operation? In the Celonis Process Mining for Dummies Handbook, we show you how Celonis process mining technology, enhanced with process intelligent AI, can help you streamline performance across your entire retail business so you can drive lasting value from end to end. That means purchasing, supply chain, omni-channel execution, merchandising, and customer service processes, all managed and optimized through one powerful software solution. To get your free copy of Process Mining for Dummies and see how it's generated millions in value for brands around the world like Aldi, Globus, and INGKA, head to celonis.com/remarkable retail.
Well, Lars, we're getting you just off the stage at Shoptalk, and we're delighted to have an opportunity to chat with you a little bit. I'm sure everybody listening knows IKEA very well, so we won't talk about the facts about the business so much. But one of the things you talked about on stage with Sarah was how much innovation and transformation has been going on at IKEA. You've been with the company for a while now. I'm curious just to how that has gone for you. What are some of the things that are most significant?
The funny thing is that I actually started at IKEA after I finished my university. And the reason for that was actually that I studied German, and my German teacher hated me. So I had in my mind, I will be better in German than she is. So I was then calling IKEA and said that I would like to have an internship in Germany. And they said, in Germany? Yeah, please. And it ended up that way. And so I was there for a year, and then I moved into telecom industry, and then was brought back 20 years.
One of the things which I hadn't realized, which you mentioned when you were on stage, is that IKEA just got into e-commerce about 6 years ago. Is that?
Yeah, I think it was right? 2018. We had a mail order, of course.
Right,
of course,
sure.
But really into the e-commerce started back then.
And was there something, I mean, I know some companies that were, I guess you could say, slower to get into, whether they were slow or not, I guess is a different thing, to get into e-commerce. A lot of times that was because of the profitability issues. Was that true for IKEA, or was there just something about the culture that didn't lend to?
I think all, I would say, incumbents are a little bit late adopters.
Right.
But also, I mean, the whole business idea of IKEA to transport yourself, assemble it yourself, all that, very much of that disappeared then in the new world.
Yeah.
So we needed to adjust it in a way to make it fit into the IKEA culture and the IKEA business.
Mm-hmm. So that was just kind of a realization of how the world had changed.
And then I think the big hinder is, of course, to deny things and deny that it's happening. Because we know how to manage a store. And we know the environment we are working in. But then when we enter into the e-commerce, it was, of course, I think the first thing we needed to do was to stop the denial of what's happening in the market.
Right. Now, one of the things related to that, I guess, that you talked about on stage was the need to take more chances, to make more mistakes, to take risk. Has that been part of the culture at IKEA for a while? Or is that a relatively new phenomenon?
The founder said quite frequently that we need to do more mistakes. He also said that maybe we should have a big event every year to celebrate the biggest mistakes. And we haven't thrown that idea into the trash can yet. But I think it is important to make mistakes, because that shows also, I mean, that we are striving forward. I mean, it's only the one who sleeps who doesn't make mistakes.
Right, exactly. As you think about your innovation agenda today, one of the things I found most interesting is the smaller store formats. IKEA being so known for these big destination stores. Was that difficult to get? I guess, what was the motivation behind that? But was it difficult to get the organization to take that leap?
I would say the organization is quite open-minded, but of course it's a new format, a format we are not used to. Other, I would say, economical or financial hurdles.
Sure.
But if everybody in the world are moving into the cities, and we are also, people don't have cars, etc., or the possibility to transport it yourself is limited, you need to move closer to the customer. And also with the e-commerce possibilities, if you get closer to the customer, meet them at their home turf, we do believe that we are able to pick them up in an earlier stage.
Sure.
And also a way to create traffic to the old blue boxes.
Right. So it's almost like an intercept, hub and spoke kind of strategy. Yeah, interesting.
But then, I mean, we have, I don't know how many years it was since we opened in Paris, among the first there. We have made a lot of mistakes on the journey, but we are gradually getting there.
So Steve and I last week hosted a dinner, and the Canadian president and CEO, Selwyn Crittenden, joined us for dinner. Now, part of his title is he's also Chief Sustainability Officer. So we wanted to talk about sustainability and its role with your organization. I mean, it's one of the questions we asked him. It's right baked into his title, everyone who comes into the country manager. So what role does it play, both strategically and I can see commercially, but talk a little bit about it.
I think we were very early out. We have a quite solid balance sheet. So we were able to make a lot of investment in an early stage. So, for instance, all our stores, which represent, I think, 6-7% of the footprint, we are producing all electricity ourselves. And we have also committed an additional 7.5 billion euros in investment for circularity.
Wow.
And me, a little bit above 60 years now, I must admit, I was a little bit hesitant initially when we started to talk about it. But when I saw the possibility and the positioning of the brand related to this, it was an enormous force. And I think, if I'm not totally wrong, I think IKEA is seen as one of the top 10 when it comes to this work.
Well, often I talk to CEOs and they talk about their ambitions for sustainability. Your organization has more than ambitions. You have wind farms, and it feels like it's part of the culture.
And we have something Retur Madrassen, which is that the mattresses we have one facility in Holland, and we are expanding that, where we are taking back all the mattresses and reuse them. I think also, what's interesting to me is that the base year when it comes to the footprint is, I think, 2016 in our case. Since then, we have increased our revenue by more than 30%, but our footprint has been reduced by 24%.
Wow.
So
impressive.
You can reduce it despite you are growing.
Right.
That I think is interesting.
That's fact. That's fact. Let's talk about growth. So around the world, things seem to be kind of slowing down. Maybe during COVID, I think there's a lot of buy forward, for example. But affordability around the world is certainly an issue, and maybe growth in home is slowing a bit. How does it affect your decision making and the organization and how they see opportunity?
I think historically we know that when we have a downturn, we are very aggressive because that's how we gain market shares. And we are in such a period right now.
Yeah.
So I would say we are quite aggressive. We are quite aggressive in reducing prices and things like that. But I fully agree with you that, I had expected the pandemic to be a little bit more worse to the home furniture. But it turned out
it was fantastic.
The other way around.
Yeah.
But I think also, if you look into US, I think the industry is down by 30% plus.
Yeah.
And we are suffering there, but we are not down in 30%, I can tell you.
Well, and certainly just so many people bought so many things, and they last. They're such great quality. It takes a while for them to wear out. So
yeah. No, but I think, if you look to yourself, then you had a room there. Say, I have been thinking of redoing it in several years, and then when COVID came and everybody worked from home,
now's the time.
Yeah. Now is the time.
Now's the time. I did it. I think everybody did it. But it's just interesting how you think about growth and opportunity.
Yeah, I was interested. You were talking about the focus that you have on lowering prices. And just kind of tying that back to sustainability. I know many times we've talked to leaders about the challenges of trying to offer really good prices, maintain your margins, but at the same time make investments in things like sustainability. Do you see that as a tough trade-off, or not so much?
Not so much.
Yeah.
I think if they buy furniture from IKEA instead of somebody else, hopefully they will support us on the agenda going forward when it comes to the sustainability.
Yeah.
And I think we are fully committed, and then of course you can have your doubt: can we really make it happen?
Sure.
And that's something we need to spread around the organization so that we are really committed, because 2030 is not far away.
Right. Yeah. So I know we just have a few more minutes. I wanted to maybe get you to weigh in a little bit on your leadership style, but I think even more maybe some of the lessons that you've learned over the years. When you were on stage, you were talking about the focus on values, being kind, being nice, some of those things which really resonate with me. I think a lot of people probably resonates with them as an aspiration, but maybe that's not necessarily their experience. So maybe two parts to this question. How did you get to come to see those as major beliefs or values for you? And then if you had to go back and look at, kind of advice to your younger self, maybe people who are listening that don't have quite as much experience, is there any particular advice you would give that you wish you knew earlier?
No, I think be yourself is number one, because we have hired you based on your values. Don't try to play another role, and that I think is very important. That's where I'm going wrong sometimes when I try to do things I get carried away by some PowerPoint presentation and say, this is exactly the way I would like to do it. And when I try to fit into that model, it's a disaster. So I think that's number one. And then why I say that you need to be kind is that what I have figured out that kind people, and when I say kind, I mean they should be open, they should be frank. Those people are the people who get along and get the people to work in the right direction. That's my take.
Seems simple, but maybe not so easy to do consistently, at least for me.
I think it's based in, the feet is then in the culture, I think.
Right. Well, thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us. It's been great to chat with you. I mean, Steve and I are such big fans of the IKEA business globally, and we're very intrigued always by the moves you make, the different formats, and just the expansiveness of the business. So,
do you have any advice for us in the U.S.? Because that's a tricky market, and we are trying to.
I honestly, I think the small store strategy is really brilliant. I think that.
Where were we in Austin? We were in Austin, and you were opening a new. What was that development that we were in Austin?
In the Domain.
In the Domain, you were opening a new format store there. I think that was really great.
Yeah, I think the brand is so powerful, but the closer to the customer idea, I think is so important as well, and I think it will be complementary as well as get some additional reach.
And I think another mistake the Europeans, or myself, is doing is that we are treating US as one market. I think you need to have a kind of state-by-state approach to really make an impact.
Yeah, we often see retailers based on either coasts misunderstanding the center of the country. Yeah, we think, and that's true. Whether I'm from Canada, so that's true in Canada, right? It's just a very vast land with very different, segments who act and behave differently. I mean, what I liked in your opening in the western part of our country, you don't have stores in some of these locations, but you're doing, back to your e-commerce, you're doing pickup, so that people can still have access to the great products in a more practical. Just experience that brand. And then, of course, the SHT program, which is really great. That secondhand program, I don't know if you're going to roll that out in the States, but I know that's been rolled out everywhere. I think that'll resonate with everybody. I think that's a brilliant program. So, well, thank you so much for joining us on Remarkable Retail. It's a real treat. You've had a busy day, and hope you travel safe. And thanks again for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sarah, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
We are sitting in our, one of the back rooms here at Shoptalk Europe. We just got off the mic with Lars-Johan from IKEA, and you just got off the stage with him. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about your observations. But first, we want to talk about you. Who are you? What do you do for a living?
Sure. I'm Sarah Engel. I'm the president of January Digital and January Consulting. I've spent about half my career on the brand side and working with beautiful brands like Lilly Pulitzer, Chevrolet, folks like that. And now have an opportunity to lead from a agency and consultancy perspective. So we work with folks like Carhartt, Kendra Scott, a lot of brands you've probably heard of.
Love Carhartt. So what do you do for them?
What do you have against Kendra Scott?
Nothing. But I mean, I just buy
Austin-based company. Now you're.
That's true.
Anyway, sorry.
We digress.
Take no shade by omission. Let's just put it that way. Just that one jumped out at me. So unpack that just a little bit more for us. So what do you do so the people listening understand who to call when there's trouble or opportunity?
Absolutely. So at the basic level, we're running digital marketing. We tend to be the digital or media agency of record for most of our brands. On the agency side, from a consulting perspective, man, it's a broad range right now. I think a lot of folks are really struggling from a loyalty and CRM perspective, and we'll dig in with them on that. Building new paths in terms of building out retail media networks. We've been working on that on the grocery side. So we get a lot lot deeper into, it all has that digital element to it, everything we do, but our consulting team tends to work deeper into organizations.
You got to spend 20 minutes on stage with Lars. I'm curious what that was like. He's a super interesting guy, very lovely guy, I think. What were some of your takeaways specific to the interview, and maybe just in terms of, because this is not your first time on stage at Shoptalk, and I don't know if you want to compare and contrast a little bit to some of the other leaders you've chatted with.
I mean, he's fantastic. I wasn't sure what he was going to say. As you heard, he's a very funny guy, and so you don't exactly know where he's going to go. But I think the thing that is so nice about him is that he's been so genuine. Anything he said to me behind the scenes, he was willing to say on stage, including the numbers, which I don't often find with American speakers. So I appreciate that he was willing to go there, be very specific, talk to what they're struggling with, what they've gotten right, what they've gotten wrong. I think the city store format, the smaller format, is very interesting. It makes a lot of sense. You think about people having less cars, people being in city centers, the ease, and all of us know the big blue box, and you drive an hour and it's a destination and you get your meatballs, right? Yeah. And the reality of that is quite different now. So it's not that they are shifting away from that model, but that they are kind of, as you said earlier, Steve, going towards that hub and spoke model. I think that is super interesting. One of the things he said to me as well is that they tried it in Paris first. When they tried to measure it in the same way they had measured the business in the past, it looked like a failure. When they measured it farther out, like immediate profitability, he said that on stage. Well, if you look at it by profitability, it doesn't look great. When you look at market share in that market overall, over time, then you see the actual implications. And so I think they have the ability at 80 years old to, when they say long-term, they mean long-term. And so many businesses aren't willing to wait for those outcomes.
Right. Yeah. Now, it's really refreshing. And there aren't that many brands, either by virtue of whether they're public or not, or just the culture, that are willing to take that longer-term perspective. And I think we've talked about this a bunch on the podcast, the ability to have that holistic view and realize that you're doing things for the brand over the long term, and it maybe doesn't matter so much exactly where the transaction gets rung up or how you do the attribution between your marketing spending or your real estate costs. And so, I think that's I'm very, very excited to see where that goes.
It's a huge point of conversation right now, and what's interesting is that meaning before we could just all performance marketing ourselves, we could just throw all our money after Meta and Google, and we could get the results we wanted. And it started to shift a lot where we were brought in by boards saying we need to build a brand, we need to get after building a brand. The problem is, especially if they're public, they need you to do that in a quarter. Right. And so there's a really big challenge, or you'll work with teams and they need to have help explaining to their executive team, explaining to their board new KPIs, new ways to look at the business, because the theory of we need to build a brand, everybody's kind of on that.
Nobody's going to say no.
Nobody's going to say no, but then if it doesn't show up,
if
it doesn't show up within 3 months, then push that to the side and go make some money.
As Lars said in our interview, and he was transparent on the stage, U.S. could be doing better for them. We're sitting here in Barcelona, and you travel the world. What do you think is the difference between the markets? Is America a more competitive market? Is the shopper different? Do they just have higher expectations of proximity and things that, you just mentioned the drive to the big blue box. They're clearly investing in the country. What was it, $2 billion that they've committed? So they're clearly interested in the opportunity. But what do you think sets the U.S. consumer apart?
I think all of the above to what you just said. I also think that
there's not a cultural, there's nothing standing in their way as IKEA from succeeding.
No, but I see many European brands have this challenge, and usually it's at first, and sometimes it's over time. I think IKEA, it's over time that they're figuring out this middle America. These are these flyover states. That is not a reality. Each one of those markets is completely different. And so even if you're looking at the coast, you're looking at New York versus Miami versus LA versus Portland, vastly different behaviors. And so, to go quote into the US is just a misnomer.
And I think it's very dynamic too, because we talked about COVID a little bit, but post-COVID, pre-COVID, there's been a lot of movement in the country, right? And from the composition of what a Miami looks like now to what it looked like 20 years ago, completely different, I think.
Right. Yeah. From a demographic perspective, but also just the the expectations of ease. I think Americans did not back off that expectation of ease. So what was possible during COVID should be possible now. And I think then you find brands, and I know you guys talk a lot about this, they are throwing money after same-day delivery and curbside pickup and because they believe they have to do all of those things, and then their margin starts tanking. So when you look at the U.S. and you go, okay, I'm stacking all of these things up because I think my customer needs this. Well, is it your customer who needs that? Or is it just this, quote, expectation of the U.S. market? So I see a lot of people who are, European brands who are in the U.S., backing up and saying, let's look at each of these markets individually. What does my customer actually want? Let me go ask them. Let me talk to the stores.
Yeah.
What a novel concept.
I know. How are we supposed to know what the customers want? I don't know. Ask them.
I mean, it's funny for Europeans. And we this morning we were talking to the chief retail officer from Tandem, and he was just driving home how they operate in 70 markets, 13 of which they own, and each one's very different. The Portugal, Spain, not so different than each other. But it's funny that coming from Europe, where you would very much appreciate differences, they would see this kind of, large landscape and think that's a similar canvas, but how do we get into it?
Yeah.
How do we get after it?
I mean, I wonder maybe one last question before we let you go, open the aperture a little bit. I mean, on that point, what I've come to believe is that there's just a lot of confirmation bias that goes on. So, and I'm curious, the question I guess for you is, as you look at the way the digital landscape is changing, it seems like if you went back a few years, where you had the kind of the retail apocalypse narrative, everything's moving online. So much of that was driven, I would argue, by the coast, by New York City and by the Valley, where very left brain, everything's technology driven. So therefore, why wouldn't the world operate like that? And not only did they miss that for areas close to them, but they definitely missed that for the other 90% of the country. So I'm curious, number one, do you see confirmation bias as part of the issue? But I guess more specifically, how have you seen the digital landscape evolve, and what are you focused on going forward at January Digital?
I do see that confirmation bias, and I'm sitting here smiling because I'm thinking, now I'll relay what you just said over to the AI conversation. Not just what is possible, and the confirmation bias that's happening in very high-tech areas where this is all going to be AI because it can be.
Right.
Not because it has a specific business purpose, not because it's going to make a better customer experience, not because it's going to make your teams more effective, which is everything that LJ just talked about on stage, right? It's how are my teams more effective? How do we repurpose them, upskill, reskill, which I thought was a great point of his. But I think that confirmation bias comes in a lot, and we follow these, cycles, news cycles, and, unfortunately, too often throw money after that from an organizational standpoint without having a very clear outcome. To what end? Yeah. Like, as long as we keep asking that question and build into that, clearly there are massive AI implications. They're happening now, they're happening in the future. But it's a matter...
They're happening on the thermometer here in the room. There's a little AI logo on our little thermometer, so I'm trying to figure out what that does.
Let's take it apart and see.
I'm feeling very AI'd.
It should be sensing our comfort level and adjusting, but
I'm sure. It seems a little chilly, though, for my taste in here. I don't know. So maybe the AI is not working.
Maybe it wants us to be cold because we're sharper.
Yes.
So we don't fall asleep with jet lag.
The jet lag comes in. So before we let you go, anything else, any other impressions you wanted to share with our audience?
I mean, there are two things that he didn't mention to you guys just now that I thought were quite interesting. One, I didn't know before we went on stage, and most of that I did know, but he talked about, I was asking, how do you keep saying get closer to your customer? What does that really mean, right? And of course, the city store format gets closer. But he said that they have anti-bureaucracy weeks where all of their senior team physically goes and works in a store and serves meatballs and washes dishes and, does transactions. And I love that concept, and that goes back to their roots of they always have people transition to completely different roles every 3 to 5 years. So that rotational program. Yeah. So it's not only rotational on your way up, also at the top, they're physically going into stores. And so I love that element. I think that sometimes from a U.S. perspective, and sometimes in general, we don't respect the stores and our frontline workers as much as we should. And during COVID, it became so clear that that touch point with your customer, how valuable it is. And of course, obviously from a revenue perspective, it's incredibly valuable.
And it opened up, I don't know if it opened up or widened a cultural schism between store support and the stores, right? I mean, it it seems like sometimes you forget that there's no cash registers in head office, that old saying, right? But I think there's a lot of work trying to pull that back together. But, the pressures are different. So, working in the store helps that come together, right?
And just at January Digital, we say direct but kind. It's one of our core values. To have a conversation with somebody like that on stage who is leading forward, the first thing they talk about is kindness and what that means. And he just said frank, kindness isn't just nice. Right. It's not just making peace.
You're doing someone a service by being honest.
By being honest with them.
There are better ways to do it than some not so good ways to do it.
So I just appreciate, I don't know that that's always the first topic of conversation that leaders have, especially in a public forum like this. And it's quite genuine to who he is and who they are. And I think that to me is a huge takeaway.
All right. Well, thanks so much for helping us with the interview.
Very kind of you.
Yes.
Very kind of you.
I'm so glad to see you,
and for joining us on the mic. And best of luck for the rest of the trip.
Absolutely.
The rest of the conference. And we'll see you somewhere out in the world, I'm sure, again.
Yes. Thank you for this podcast. It means a lot to a lot of us.
Well, one of the reasons we decided to do post-interview discussions on the pod was the backstory about how these interviews come to pass. And how did we get someone like the chairman of IKEA to sit down with us? Well, it was really thanks to Sarah Engel.
Wasn't it begging?
Yeah, there was begging. There's a lot of tradecraft involved. That's certainly one foundation of the tradecraft. But Sarah was kind enough, and she's a fan of the pod, and we're a fan of hers, and she kind of helped us bring what was a very interesting interview because I'd always struck by, and it's not the only person I've spoken to from IKEA, the humility of such a fantastic retailer. I mean, they don't take anything for granted.
Yeah, from what I've gleaned from conversations, just really like the culture there. I love the long-term view they take or able to take, and the focus on driving their business through values. A lot of people talk about it, but as we got into a little bit, not that many people actually seem to do it or do it well. So it's very impressive. So yeah, thanks to Sarah for helping us make that happen, and for Lars-Johan for winding his way through the vast conference space to find our little corner of the world where we recorded that. I was a little worried that he was going to either change his mind or get lost or both. So
yeah.
It was really fun to talk to him, and I just continue to be really interested to see how some of IKEA's new moves take hold and where they go from here.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 8, presented by Salonis, will air every Tuesday. Be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us. And if you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
I'm Steve Dennis, author of Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, and my brand new book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, which is available in hardcover, ebook, and Audible formats just about anywhere you prefer to buy your books. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.